Welcome back into the live stream today. We're going to be jumping into Bitcoin and also just in overall the market and how it's going to respond to what I think is some very interesting news, and that is all about 401ks, IRAs, all of that coming into investment portfolios to a wallet near you. We're going to dive into that deep. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into TechPath. As you guys know, we cover a lot of crypto news, blockchain, Web3. If you're new to our channel, first thing you want to do is jump in right now, like a few videos, and make sure and hit the subscribe button because that's going to get you live stream updates, all sorts of stuff in your feed when we drop a lot of these kinds of content pieces. Remember also, if you're going to look at sharing a video, especially around the educational side of where blockchain, crypto investing, and in general, where technology is going, hopefully you're going to share our channel out there. So make sure and shoot that out to a friend of yours and share the news. Let's get into a couple of the story articles today. And really, this is about kind of the aspect of crypto adoption. Many people, and I talk about this often, there's really kind of two things that I believe are going to be the real accelerant for crypto. One, of course, is going to be adoption. The other is going to be security. A lot of this we've talked about here on the show, and we will see a lot more, I think, in the way of security, especially around wallets, banks, adoptions, et cetera, that really will start to kind of fly in the face of traditional finance. But a lot of what's happening now, I think, is already moving in this direction. With this story right here from Barron's, Fidelity made a splash with Bitcoin 401ks. Fintechs are also wading in too. Fidelity Investments, of course, made waves in the retirement and planning industry when it became the first major record keeper to roll out Bitcoin for 401k plans. So this is pretty big news. It is going to happen this fall. And when you look at the amount of funds that they're managing, let me kind of zoom in on that a little bit here. The plan administrator, which oversees 2.7 trillion in 401k assets spread over 20.4 million investors. This was just at the end of last year. You can imagine what this would do to the overall market. I'll show you some charts here in a minute. There's quite a bit here in terms of opportunity. And when you think opportunity, the point is new investors and also people understanding and starting to get in on kind of the joke here in the sense that Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies in general, really have a long tail for opportunities, I think, in terms of overall investment. Another note here is that MicroStrategy is going to be one of the first companies to sign up. So they'll be one of the companies that will enable 401k investing and using Bitcoin, of course, as an asset class. So I think that in itself, not surprising, but I think there will be more and more companies that will start to go in this direction for two reasons. One is because of the rising popularity within the millennial and the Gen Z. Not only that, because of the amount of employer mix that we're starting to see in terms of new hires. When you look at new hires, people starting to go into companies, and one of the first things they'll look at are some of the investment plans. And if those investment plans are leaning into crypto, that's the perfect example of how all this kind of plays into it. Here's a couple of tweets here. Many still don't really get the importance of this. The 401k, billions of dollars from millions of people, we just explained, will flow indirectly into Bitcoin, having a huge impact on its price. And also, more importantly, its trustworthiness. And I believe that is back to the whole point of security. If the traditional population, people who have not invested in Bitcoin or other crypto assets before, start to understand that this asset class can be trusted to have some volatility, just like the stock market, just like certain aspects of high risk. When you look at, especially in the stock market, there's a lot of high risk assets out there that have had as much volatility as Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Obviously, crypto has maintained its volatility moniker throughout 2022, but I think this will be one of the factors that really kind of puts it on the map. Fidelity calls Bitcoin truly decentralized. The fact that they're actually out there making these kinds of statements, it's likely that Bitcoin will remain one of the most secure, decentralized, and universally adopted digital assets. Again, big news for the maxis out there. I think this will do a lot in the way of timing for Bitcoin's next run. Now, a lot will play into this, and you guys have heard me talk about this. We're going to do a live stream today that kind of talks a little bit about some of the portfolio builds that you want to look at in this bear market, because we could be seeing a potential option now of some very interesting entry points. So a lot of that, I think, when you look at where Bitcoin stands today, the opportunity coming up, whether it goes to 25, 28, and then towards the end of the year in Q4, could be a lot of interesting things happening with the fact that Fidelity is going to be rolling this out. We're going to start seeing our first new investors starting to select within 401ks, and they have to go out to the market and buy it. It's not like some of these other types of funds. So another thing that comes into this is they're allowing for investors to put Bitcoin in their 401k. There's just 24,000 companies using Fidelity. So not only millions of investors, but now you have these companies that are invested in the aspect of understanding what digital currency is in. Why is that important? Think about this outside the IRA 401k aspect of things. And look at it from a sense of business to business and also business to consumer transactions. Once a company starts to get comfortable with crypto, they start to kind of go down the rabbit hole. And once you start doing that, you realize the ease of use, much easier than a lot of people think, and more importantly, the low cost of fees to transact internationally, across borders, within your own countries, states, or even local municipalities. There is a big difference here, and I think this will start to play out in the B2B space in a big way and kind of back its way in to the business side of things when it comes to crypto. This was a quarterly retirement market data research that broke down a few things here. This, of course, is retirement assets, 37 trillion in the first quarter of 2022. There's a few in here that are really interesting, and I want to go to that chart right there, the 401k plan assets. So right around 7 trillion. This, of course, will continue to grow, but right there is Q1 2022, 7.3 trillion, as you can see. Now, think about this for a second. If you have 7.3 trillion moving into the market, and even with just a small percentage, let's say 1 in 10, that's 10%, you're talking about $700 billion moving into the space. That would essentially, if it all went into Bitcoin, most likely would be the secured asset that would most likely be the one. Over the next 12 months, we could see as much as almost 2.5 times what our current market cap at around 370 billion right now. So you can imagine a 2.5 times run on this. Now you're talking about another all-time high for Bitcoin. So this is a real, this is a big thing, and I think it's a real bonus for what is going to happen in the crypto community. More importantly, this is where it becomes, because remember, that's just 7.3 trillion. Think about all the investments that those same investors have. So all of a sudden, they're exposed to it in their 401k or in their IRAs, and they start to say, wait a minute, maybe I can go to the market with this and start investing in it like stocks. That will be the next big move toward where crypto adoption will go. So I think this actually has a bigger potential flywheel effect than maybe anything else we've seen, even more so than regulation adoption. What I think regulation will obviously roll into this as well. At the same time, there's a lot of things happening right now at the same time. Pros and cons, though, of course, in holding crypto in a 401k. And they kind of go into a couple of the basic ones. Obviously, it's, it has volatility just like any other. The other way crypto is unstable when it comes to regulation. We haven't seen full regulation, but Bitcoin, of course, has had somewhat of a green pass from the SEC in terms of being considered a commodity. That in itself, I think, will help in not only adoption, but also the curve in which we see digital assets start to accelerate into securities. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of digital assets out there that will have the capacity to conform to the securities regulations and the disclosure laws and requirements that it takes for them to get listed on these exchanges as a security. The other aspect of that we'll continue to see, and this is where I think it's going to get very choppy for the exchanges, is how securities are going to be looked at when the exchanges, of course, have to comply with those types of SEC rulings. So a lot kind of ruling into that. I think it does kind of flow, again, in a very positive way. If you look at just some of the stock winners this year, this is a good example of the 5 worst Dow Jones stocks so far in 2022. I mean, you're seeing some of the big stock names out there. You've got Cisco Systems in here, Home Depot. These, again, are stocks that are being held in these types of mutual funds, IRAs, etc. CRM right there with Salesforce, and then you've got Nike, even Disney's on the list here in terms of what they've had in terms of performance over the last year. So this is not something that is out of the realm, and I think of seeing maybe as much as a 10% position. We did do a poll too that I'll show you guys here at the end of or a little later in the show, where it breaks down how much would you put into an IRA mutual fund as it goes into if they were to offer crypto. Other things that are good for crypto in general right now is a little bit of regulation, and I think a little bit more awareness on Capitol Hill. Here is U.S. senators proposing a bill to cut taxes on the $50 crypto payments. This would be pretty significant because this would move into everyday transactions. There will be some winners here, and I think some of the Layer 1 tokens could be winning here, along with, and to a certain extent, the Lightning Network and maybe even Bitcoin, but getting into where we don't see taxable events at a $50 expenditure utilizing digital assets in crypto. Again, this will get into whether or not these are considered securities. This, of course, is Patrick Toomey and Kristen Sinema, who both have introduced now the bill to the U.S. Senate to exclude small crypto transactions. This was after they went in to get the benchmark of 200, and that didn't work out. So I think this may be one that gets passed through. Now, the question will be, is getting some bipartisan support. We are starting to see some bipartisan support around regulation in general. I think in the sense of what we will see in crypto regulation overall, stablecoin regulation. There's some news on that. We'll talk about that as well. If you look at other aspects of this has a lot of similarities into the point of whether or not people would put this into their retirement accounts. Here's half of South Africans will invest in crypto if banks are providing such services. Now, we did a video on this, and I would recommend you guys taking a look at it. Just search our channel, Banks and Crypto. There's some real potential here for banks to, and I know that many of you will say, what's the purpose of crypto if banks are going to get involved? The purpose is going to be the fact that a lot of people who are sitting on the sidelines are there for a reason. They're there for two things. One, complexity of onboarding, which has always been a problem with the less than tech savvy retail customer. And then two is security and safety. And those, unfortunately, just like the early days of the internet, those unfortunately are characteristics of where crypto is today. You guys watching our channel, you guys get it, you're in on the joke. The point is that you're much more savvy from a technical standpoint. You're savvy in the sense of opening up your mind to what new assets can be, and you're probably very savvy to what the macroeconomic indicators are that are pushing the global monetization system overall. So I think in essence, the advantage of this moving into the bank side of things is a big one because it can bring in really the crypto newbies and people that are just now getting into it. Just like in the early days of the internet, we didn't have everybody on the internet at that same time. Adoption rate, sure, it's accelerated dramatically. And if you look at adoption of the internet and adoption of crypto, has very similar pathways. In fact, crypto is being adopted a little bit faster. Some of the points that they made here is found that 53% of South Africans said they have little to no knowledge of cryptocurrencies. This is my point exactly, is that without knowledge, you're not going to get the faith of the traditional investor, the retail investor, the mom, the dad, the middle-aged Americans and global citizens out there that would really kind of jump into this. And I think this is a good representation of what happened in South Africa. 14% of South Africans also have considerable knowledge of cryptocurrency. 23% of the participants remain neutral. And then the vast majority was 53% had little or no understanding. So again, we have a long way. And I think South Africa is still one of those countries that is highly adopted already. So getting a double-digit number, I think that would be much lower in the United States. I'd love to see the numbers there. But I think this is kind of moving in the right direction overall. And again, it gets back to the point of what are going to be the key triggers for adoption. I do think private investment accounts will be a big trigger. Regulation will be a big trigger. And some sort of governance from the United States to be at least set the tone for what these assets are going to be ruled as over the next few years. Prince Philip of Serbia calms rumors of Arab country Bitcoin adoption. And again, He kind of talks a little bit here is that we're going to see a lot more countries starting to move in on this. He kind of he says, placating rumors that Arab countries will soon adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. It's definitely going to happen, but I don't know which country or who was going to do it or anywhere like that. Point is that if countries are even considering this, we're going to continue to see mass adoption, especially in some of these emerging markets. Emerging markets, I still believe, are one of the biggest markets for where this adoption is going to come from. Most likely, we'll see this in the Pacific Rim, South America, and the Middle East, I think, to continue to move in this direction. There's a lot happening, I think, around the Muslim community, and if you look at it's only a matter of time for a Muslim community country follow Sharia law would have to adopt it. Some people would grab that and make it a selling, saying that, of course, I think it's a good potential. And he's kind of leaning into the same point, is that this could happen, and the likelihood is whether or not we'll start to see this here in the next year is the question mark. Again, I think this goes back to regulation and what the United States does, because it will set the standard, especially around the dollar. So a lot happening there. You guys have seen me talk about this before, is 1 billion users in crypto by 2030. And this came from the BSG, the Boston Consulting Group report. We talked about this earlier. I still think this number is a little bit light. And a lot of times these reports are somewhat conservative. Think around 250 to 300 million people in crypto already from a global standpoint. I think getting to the billion is easy enough to do, and definitely a potential. But if you look at the adoption curve that they've got here, it's reasonable. It definitely is reasonable. And they're kind of going back to kind of the internet's adoption curve to 1 billion users. And that is, it's a good example. I think from 92, I would say this was not the era. Really around 96 was where we started to see. They believe that we're like 1998, which was still pre-major adoption on the internet. So at that time in 1998, it was right prior to the .bomb. So the opportunity here is pretty big in terms of adoption curves. Again, I still think that might be a little bit light, because I think the accelerant, and because this is dealing with financial systems, it's a different animal than what the information systems were being done with the internet. The technical aspect also of the internet in the early era, I mean, you did have the AOLs of the world that were trying to make it simple and easier, but it's different when you start to see banks rolling out this in a big way, because this will be a huge, I think, avalanche of a lot of different financial institutions moving this direction. All right, so crypto wallet market is poised to grow by over 680 million by 2026. Again, this is one of those numbers that I think is a little bit low for crypto wallets and what that market might look like. If you compare a lot of what's happening in the space, one of the things they talked about right here, let me kind of just zoom in on this. Brokers and lending platforms such as Three Arrows, Verger, all those guys, that's the one that I think causes the issue with more and more crypto wallets being, especially secure crypto wallets, being at the state. And whether this could be hardware wallets, this also could be online wallets that are secure in terms of self-custody. So again, this will also change a lot if we start to see self-custody assets or aspects, maybe from the banking community. Unlikely, because I think the aspect of what banks will do is just like anything else. They'll leverage the funds, go out and make loans, just like anything else. So remember, banking has been doing this for quite some time, so it's anything new. Tether, of course, is launching a P2P video chat app called Keat, and I think this is, stablecoins, how the use case of stablecoins will be integrated. Another reason why I think adoption is going to be on the fly here. This is a fully encrypted. It is a product of Bitfinex, Tether, and Hypercore. It's only available on desktop for now, but it will be basically think of it from a Zoom aspect, I guess, in the essence of what it could be. So it's a messenger app built on Hole Punch, platform that allows developers to build Web3 apps. And again, maybe this gets into where we'll start to see more and more integrations with video and how maybe micropayments can be done. We've already started to see this with Lightning and even a podcasting network with Podcasting 2.0, where you can actually, send sats over to a creator. This will be interesting if you can start to do things around this from a video standpoint. Bad news on crypto in general, and I think this will be, again, another factor that will take some time to develop, and that is possibly where we'll start to see sports and or other aspects, maybe social media to a certain extent, maybe much more than we do already. But here's an F1 team who is forced to remove crypto-related ads during the French Grand Prix. I don't know if this is super bad, but it is in essence a scenario where we could start to see situations where more sporting events started to get away from them. Now, remember, here in the United States, we've had quite a bit of crypto adoption, especially in the sport arenas, and a lot of the athletes have started to move in this direction as advocates and brand ambassadors. So I don't know that we'll necessarily see this in a scale level, but if something like FIFA, which has already partnered with Algorand, gets by with it, if we continue to see Super Bowl ads and we continue to see MLB and basketball players and athletes moving in this direction, I don't necessarily see too much in terms of restriction on this down in the future. The other thing that you have to factor into is how our payment speed's going to be looked at, especially from merchants. I talked about it earlier in the show. Here's an example. Bitcoin Lightning is actually faster than a MasterCard transaction. This gets back to the whole point of whether or not we start to see Bitcoin roll out in the B2B space and also B2C space. Because I think with each one of those, the potential is going to be pretty significant. He's kind of showing how fast, if you're flowing in there, boom, boom. And you can see how quickly. Okay, so wow. Again, very quickly in terms of transaction speeds. This again will continue to be an issue though with the issue of congestion, things of that nature. So keep an eye on layer ones and also even some of the layer twos as we start to see some of the aspects being used, maybe around Ethereum. So a lot happening there. Fun fact, of course, banks are closing on the weekend. Bitcoin is never going to close. So I think this changes the market dynamics overall. More people will start to understand we are on a 24/7 clock now, and it will be looked at in a different way. Markets, I think, will start to flow in this direction. We will see major exchanges move into this type of trading habit. I think eventually maybe Robinhood is the first one that starts to move into this cycle, but it definitely could start to accelerate even more investment opportunity. Don't forget to hit like on the video. If you guys like these breakdowns where we drill down into projects like this, we take a little bit more of a macro look at how Bitcoin is being affected, make sure and just hit the like button. We'd love to get your feedback. And of course, make sure and get some questions in over on the side. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. I know we have a poll coming up as well. Let me get to this last little point right here. If Bitcoin works, it basically obliterates, well, obsoletes banks, but central banks. It obliterates. Now, I will say this, that with the fact that central banks and the banking industry overall is still at play here, I don't necessarily see, and when you move into a market like what Bitcoin has done, and also cryptocurrencies in general, I think the question will be is whether or not they get surprised at the adoption curve. Because remember, this has happened before, and that was the internet, the era of the internet. Many regulators and global banks and global companies did not think that the internet was going to see the kind of adoption it saw, including companies like Microsoft. When I was a young entrepreneur and working at Microsoft in the tech field, we had that very scenario of the fact that Bill Gates is on record that he did not think the internet was going to be something. And I think that's where we are right now with crypto. The question is, will they get surprised again? When I say they, the monetary system. I think the banks are savvy enough to catch up. The question is, how do they catch up? What kind of things are they going to be doing to try to draw in your coins? Remember, that's another thing I'm a big proponent of is self-custody. So I'm not really into the aspect of banks. I am for people who have never been in crypto before, and maybe that's their gateway into crypto that makes them feel secure. If that is it, power to them, because I think that brings and onboards a lot of people. Let's get over to a poll real quick. Just take what you guys would do. All right, so what if your 401k would allocate some Bitcoin? Let's look at it. All right, so 17% of you said no, zero. But more than 50%, 30%, that's not bad. Okay, so less than 50, not bad. I feel like this is similar to what people are looking at this maybe on, and again, this goes back to that point that I was talking about. If you look at 7.3 trillion in assets that could go, lit in the fall of this year through Fidelity, this is just one major controller of assets in terms of, especially around RIAs and 401ks. Imagine if that was all 6 of the majors, and you're talking around 30 trillion in controlled assets or managed assets, what that percentage would look like if we saw a 10%. Now you're talking about a $3 trillion insertion at just the investment class, not the seepage into traditional trading and people starting to get exposed to Bitcoin. This really, I think, is a big thing to be on the watch for, and it's going to be happening with Fidelity this fall, which means we're going to see a lot of companies following suit. Let's get into a few questions today. All right, Funny Dummies. I had a SEP at Fidelity for years. I would be able to switch my allocation to Bitcoin, or do I have to be an accredited investor? That'll be a question I think that will be answered, I think, with Fidelity. From what I've read so far, it does not look like accredited investors are the requirement. So if that is the case, then good for you. You'd be able to start moving into things like that. The question is how many or what types of assets would you be able to convert if you were in some sort of lock-in? Paul, do you think the Fed meeting tomorrow is going to crush prices? It seems the market is deeply fearful right now. Joby, so if you've watched our show very much, you know that I'm a bit of a conservative investor, and you also know that I follow macro trends in a big way. And so far, they have not guided me wrong. I still believe we're going to see a full basis point, 100 basis points tomorrow on the Fed update, and I think that it will have some effect, but a lot of this is priced in. Now, when I say some effect, what does that mean? Well, we're already clipping into 20K on Bitcoin, which we anticipated. If you listened to our show yesterday with Gareth is still leaning a little bit more positive. I'm still on the fence there of whether or not we see a 19K Bitcoin coming in, possibly tonight, on the overnight trading activity from Asia. So I'm going to be watching it very closely. And actually, most likely, I'm going to be tracking this through the night. So if you're on our mastermind group, I'll be up probably late tonight dropping sentiment in there for you guys. Obliques. Let's get into this. 401k is a typical U.S. thing. Here, the pensions are differently invested. I would agree with you, but the numbers that I'm talking about are U.S. data. So remember, this is just United States data. Still one of the biggest crypto investing countries in the world. And when you look at the fluency of the dollar, the U.S. dollar, and of the investors in the United States, then it has a major impact on the global aspect of where crypto could be going. All right, so Lord Byron, I want to get one. Right now, I'm just holding Grayscale Trust in my Roth. That's good, not bad. I think the other aspect of that is check out Fidelity. Looks like they're claiming that this is a fall release, so it's going to be big. Is iTrust Capital a centralized exchange or bank? I don't believe so. In the essence of a centralized exchange, I'm sure there's certain licensing aspects that a money manager has to have for centralizing funds, but I think through what, and we're going to get the iTrust guys on here, I do see their security through Fireblocks and how they're dealing with the crypto custody. That's the other aspect that I think is very important in any type of asset class that you're investing in. And most likely Fidelity is going to end up using someone like a Fireblocks or others for crypto custody, because I'm sure they're not going to be ready to take on that kind of scenario. What do you think about Sam Bankman-Fried and his tweet, Voyager offer to give consumers back 75% of the account holdings? I've kind of been on this, flip-flopping on this situation, because any kind of offer that you see in bankruptcy courts are usually going to be viewed as predatory. What he's offering, though, when I looked at and redove into the proposal, it's not a bad deal for crypto customers of Voyager. But remember, and listen, I'm not letting Voyager off the hook at all. It's a terrible company, bad in the sense of what they have done to the market. but their number one fiduciary responsibility is to their stockholders. And that's any publicly traded company. It's a little different when you're privately traded. But when you're publicly traded, you have one mission, and that's return to your stockholders. That, I think, is what is going to hold this one up, because I think Voyager is holding out for the stockholders' position. And unfortunately, the customers will fall prey to the classification as unsecured creditors. And that is the worst, because I've been in that boat before. I'm an unsecured creditor in many places where someone has filed bankruptcy, and it was pennies on the dollar. And I'll just be frank with you about that. Banks are corrupting all of crypto. I think here's the thing, Marcus, is when we look at banks, it's a necessary evil to a market like what we're dealing with. Because here's what I truly believe is that, unfortunately, we have not been able to clip, when I say we, the crypto community, yet has not been able to flip the domino on adoption. If it had been not so closely related to the fall of the stock market, Bitcoin literally was lockstep with the S&P 500. We have broken loose? If we ever get broke loose from the traditional S&P 500 and what's happening in traditional markets, then games change. But right now we're tied to traditional finance. And that, unfortunately, I think could be the gateway onto this. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's kind of the canary in the coal mine. If you let the investors into this market that have never been in this market before, this could turn things pretty quickly, and people would start demanding a lot more of their financial institutions. In other words, you could get a lot more liberty around your finances, especially as you start to discover and uncover the real rabbit hole of Bitcoin. How do you convert a traditional IRA to Bitcoin? That will be a question, I think, Joanne, that will be on Fidelity, or if you're using someone like iTrust Capital, which is a sponsor of our show, check them out, because you should check out iTrust, because they'll be one of those that will continue on to offer these kind of services. I think in things of this nature, that's their specialty, and I think that will be a scenario. They do have conversion programs that you can utilize as well with iTrust, so a good one. Catch 22 is that your employer has an option that to add crypto, so most will probably not. I think you're right, I don't know that we'll see a large percentage of that 20,000+ in Fidelity. But remember, there's 5-7 more major companies out there that are offering these services to employer-backed funds for internal investments. And I think there will be an accumulative effect among all of those. At some point, someone's going to hit a home run, and we're going to see some sort of movement in that space. Again, back to my argument that we're seeing too much growth in terms of new employees that are invested in digital assets. This has come from millennials and Gen Zs who are going to look to this and start asking questions. So to be competitive in the marketplace, eventually an employer will have to roll this direction. David Holm, Paul, I'm using cryptocurrency strategy that you are helping us with on my plan to buy stocks. I like how it helps me through much better with risk. Perfect, good. And I think that's the thing. If you're looking at any kind of risk tolerance, again, everybody's portfolio is different. Leverage-wise, whether you go into leverage or not, also the type of trades that you might be doing. Again, looking at fundamentals. It's hard to in the crypto space because you don't get earnings reports and things of that nature, but you do get a lot of data and news information along with social sentiment that we track a lot. And to me, retail buyer and retail investor sentiment, to me, is one of the biggest secure ways to track the market and know where the movements are starting to happen. All right, Jason, a couple more here. We'll try to get to a few more and then we'll wrap here. Every company, state, nation, individual, city, retirement will have to buy. Yes, that's a possibility. If they said inflation was 9.1, it was definitely up around 15%. That's something, it's interesting you say that, Jason, because we were on our show talking about inflation. Really, I felt like we were probably at a plus 15 on this 9.1 print. Kryptonian, Fidelity institutions used crypto last year. Retailers still on the waiting list. I think that's true, but I think their rollout plan, again, is fall. If they pull back on it for some regulatory scenario, that would be a bad issue. But if they actually roll out on this and hold to their mark, the other factor is remember, that now that they put a bullseye on their back, there's others that are going to start the move and try to basically beat them to the punch. So I wouldn't be I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see others start moving in this direction. All right, to the moon. This is why I think the SEC will ultimately have their way and nail every crypto as a security, because these companies are now going down the rabbit hole. And again, you're right. There's a lot of banks, there's a lot of institutions, and there are a lot of people and investors that are starting to look at this as a classified investment vehicle. And once you move into that, you're going to have governance, and the SEC is one of those animals. So it is what it is, guys. You kind of have to understand that. The point is, though, is that's still going to take years. You guys are ahead of the curve right now. You're still in very early in the market. As you saw on the adoption curve chart we just showed you, 1998 in terms of the internet. So imagine what you were doing on the internet in 1998, and you'll kind of get the point. All right, you guys are tuned in to the podcast right now. Make sure and jump in here on our live streams, because this is where we do a lot of our breakdowns, our deep dives. You can also just subscribe to the show, because it's going to give you notifications when we do go live. Just hit the bell. You'll get those notifications. It's really easy. And, of course, join the Diamond Circle. We're going to be dropping a lot of stuff into the Diamond Circle, especially about our portfolio build out of buying at the bottom. We're doing that video at our 3 o'clock live today. Don't miss it. If you guys want to catch me, it is out on Twitter, @Paul Barron. I'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.